Thanks for joining us here on 11 Investigates Case Files. We have another episode for you today. I'm Melissa Andrews along with lead investigator Brian Duggar. We're going to be talking today about the tragic deaths of two siblings in Monroe County. A woman just went on trial, was found guilty of driving drunk and killing those siblings and injuring 15 other people. Megan Hartnett, she was our reporter here for WTOL 11 covering the trial. Thanks for being here. You did a great job. It's a very tough thing to listen to day in and day out, and you're a younger reporter, so I'm sure that you wanted to get everything correct. You wanted to do due diligence on both sides, but a really hard topic to cover.
I mean, it was. I went in kind of preparing myself to hear things that might be difficult to hear, knowing that, you know, just when anyone dies, that can be hard to hear, but especially two children, when that's kind of the focus of the trial. I knew that was a lot going into it.
And this really was a very high-profile case. I mean, a lot of media outlets were interested. I'm guessing the courtroom must have just been crazy.
It was, I mean, packed. The media room, they only had 2 cameras in there, but the media room was filled. There was family from all sides. I mean, even people who were just guests at the party were there. I mean, people were very interested in this case. There was a lot of people there.
Yeah, a real heaviness too, because we're talking about the deaths of 2 children. We know their family is going to be there. So in the end, Marshella Chidester, who was 67 years old, was found guilty on all 9 counts, second-degree murder, 2 counts of OVI causing death, and 5 counts of OVI causing injury. You and I have talked a bit about this case. What was the defense trying to say about this?
The defense went in their opening and they said that there was going to be showing her personality and that there was no intent to be reckless here. There was no intent to cause death, and that they hinted at this idea that she may have been having a seizure or that there was some sort of medical issue that led to this, but
so talking about intent, they're trying to dispute then the second-degree murder charge, yes, essentially.
There was even a motion to throw it out, and the judge denied that.
And that's really interesting what you said. Early on, they introduced the idea that she had a seizure, and I think she even may have said something at the scene about possibly having a seizure. But then the defense didn't really get into that aspect.
Yeah, in the opening statement, her attorney said the evidence will show she only had 1 glass of wine and she didn't finish it. So I think when you introduce an idea to the jury in your opening statements, they expect you to produce evidence to that end. And
there was only 3 witnesses from the defense, and you know, we were expecting to hear from some sort of medical professional to talk about her, whether she had a seizure or her just medical history in general, and that didn't happen. We were expecting to hear about her personality. They said that she was a veteran. She was at one point the Commodore of the boat club, and none of that happened throughout the trial.
Interesting. I want to hear from the mom, though, Mariah Dodd, because she's the one who lost the most out of what happened here and what makes it such a tragic event. So here's what she had to say about what she remembers from that birthday party.
And that's when she told me that Jaden was, life flew to a hospital and Zane and Alana were no longer there. She told me, I started to freak out. I wanted to jump up, but I couldn't. I was hooked up to so many wires and machines, and at that time I didn't feel no physical pain because of all the medication they were pumping through me.
Megan, kind of set the scene here for this was a birthday party for a 3-year-old, and I don't know how many people were there, but when you think about these 2 kids, Zane and Elena, like, where were they sitting? What was going on inside that room?
So, I mean, there was a bunch of different guests who were at the birthday party who testified. They described it as magical. It was circus themed. There was tons of different things. There was balloons, people on stilts. They said it was just like wonderful. And at this point, we know that Mariah was with her 3 kids, and she had sat them down for lunch. She had just went to go get them cake pops, and then everyone described it as a boom, a loud crash, don't remember anything. And that's where Mariah was saying she doesn't remember anything from the crash. She remembers going to get the cake pops for her kids and then waking up in the hospital. And so from what we know, they were sitting there and the car came through and pushed them forward, basically, is what it sounded like.
Thankfully, she didn't remember anything, really. I remember when we first reported this story, I had to take a minute and go into the newsroom because as a mother, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than what she had to go through and that day. And maybe that's the reason they didn't essentially cross-examine her, although one thing that you thought was interesting was that there was a cross-examination, but there weren't essentially really any questions.
No, at this point, Mariah had been the last of the victims for that day to testify, and the defense hadn't crossed any of them. But when asked about cross, he got up, and I think you ask yourself, what could he possibly question her about? And he got up there and he was sobbing, and he said,
and this is Marshella Chidester's attorney.
The defense attorney, yes. And he was apologizing, saying how tragic it was, how he thinks about her all the time because he lost his son in September. And he just got up there and was crying. It was hard to hear him at first. And I was like, is he asking questions? I can't tell what's going on. And then realizing that, I think everyone didn't know what to do. The prosecution slowly stood up, not really sure even how to object to this. And the judge started to say stuff, and he said, that's all, I just wanted to apologize.
So the defense attorney was getting super emotional when talking about the victims.
Yes. He was up there sobbing.
And it almost seems like that would help the prosecution's case.
Bizarre. And so basically they told him to kind of stop and sit down.
Yeah. And I mean, because he did say he lost his son in September of last year. His son was, I believe, around 26. It was medical conditions, but so not at all the same thing. And of course, losing a child has to be one of the hardest things anyone could face, but very different than what happened in this trial.
Seems like there could have been an opportunity for him to do that outside of the scope of the trial. So I want to go back to the second-degree murder charge because that's where we're looking at intent. And we have some sound here regarding where the prosecution thinks that they can prove the intent. So take a listen.
She crashed into that truck. She had to know things were not right, but she continued on.
So the truck is really interesting because she backed out of her driveway, and I think they said it was about 18 miles per hour. She rams into the truck, and then she just takes off. And the boathouse is only 450 feet away, and she accelerated up to 45 miles per hour. So if I'm reading this right, they're saying, well, the intent is she should have known when she ran into the truck that, hey, I need to stop. Something's not right here.
Yeah,
And then she proceeded on, right?
Exactly, and that's where I wrote down, there's different states of mind when you have a second-degree murder charge. There's intending to kill or intending to create bodily harm, but there's also this third one, which is knowingly creating a high risk of death or great bodily harm by your actions, knowing that this is a likely result.
There you go.
And so that's where the prosecution said she almost had a moment to stop, like you said, to reverse into this truck. I believe she also hit a tree. It's not on the footage, but so she reversed and then still made that decision to shift it into drive. And that was the prosecution's argument when it came to intent, that she had a moment to stop, but she went forward.
Yeah, because I think if you're clear-headed and you back into something, you might jump out of your car and say, oh my gosh, what did I do? Stop, but she did not do that.
I want to set up, because once this all happened, obviously the authorities arrived to the scene and there was some questioning going on. This this detective Schmidt,
yeah.
He said that he could smell alcohol on Chidester. She had bloodshot, watery eyes, unable to maintain her balance. He was told at the scene that she had neuropathy, so she self-reported that. She didn't want to conduct any certain sobriety tests, a walk and turn, due to her neuropathy. He did the finger test.
The finger test, and he said that she failed that. She was just staring straight ahead, and then when she tried to follow, she would move her head with it. He also, he's been trained in a lot of different ways. Those are the standard field sobriety tests, but then there's a few extra ones, which can be like saying the alphabet without singing it, counting down from certain numbers. So like in this example, he told her count from 100 down to 88. She wasn't able to do that. And so he said to him, it was very clear that she was not sober.
Was he also the one that asked her, hey, on a scale from 0 to 10, how do you think you are?
There was actually a few different officers who kept asking her different questions. He was the one who asked on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, well, we have that sound, so let's listen to the sound and then we'll break it down.
When's the last time you had something to drink? Probably half an hour ago. Half an hour ago? What do you drink? Wine. Okay. 2, 10. 0 being like you're stone cold sober, you can drive perfectly. 10 being you're passed out drunk. Where do you think you're at right now? 7. A 7? Okay.
First of all, the demeanor that she has, did she know she killed children at that point?
It didn't seem like she did. Once she had crashed into the boat club, they had taken her and just put her in a chair for a little bit. And some of the guests who were there said she kind of was like, where's my husband? What's going on? And it wasn't in that footage, but when she was walking to one of the cars, she had said, oh my God, this is terrible. I hope nobody's dead.
But we've seen that in other cases where the person who ends up killing people because they're intoxicated, they're just not getting it.
It's not registering.
No.
And obviously the blood alcohol content was the main thing in this case. You know, if they could prove that she was drunk, then it was going to be easy to prove that she was guilty in this case. And right there you heard her say that, oh, I'm a 7 out of 10. And I think she told the officer that I had 1 glass of wine, but there seemed to be other evidence that was introduced implying that maybe she had additional wine, right?
Yeah, so for the majority of the case, we had known that she had had 1 glass of wine. The timeline was very unclear. That's where she says about half hour ago, I had a glass of wine, and that would put her at about 2:30, where the only thing that had been introduced was that between 11 and 12:15, we knew that she had a glass of wine. I didn't know if it was one of those things where maybe her timeline was just off because she
I
just
think a lot
had
of
a
people
major
honestly
crash.
say they've had 1 glass of whatever because you're giving the police a little bit of truth. Hey, maybe they can smell it on my breath. Maybe my blood alcohol is going to come back with a little something. So I'm going to give you that. I'm going to say, yes, I had something, but clearly it wasn't the truth because the blood alcohol was a 0.018, which is more than twice the legal limit. But one thing that I thought was interesting is that according to their policy at the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, the defense brought up that they muted their body cameras during a portion of this, but he did not conduct a breathalyzer on her at that point and said something about it was because of the chaos at the scene or something. But that came back to kind of bite him a little bit as far as the defense questioning.
They said that in a case like this, especially where you know there's death involved, they want to get the blood because that's the most accurate.
Could they have done both?
They could have, and that was something that the defense brought up, but they said they were told, get the blood. That's what they wanted to focus on because it's probably going to court. You want to have the blood alcohol content, you want to have done that draw. I don't know, they really didn't go into, he just said, I wasn't told to do a breathalyzer, so they didn't.
Right, and that blood was actually drawn from the hospital about 3.5 hours after the event, right?
They said, you know, it was a weekend, they had to get a search warrant, they had to figure out who was on call. There was some time involved in trying to contact the right authorities to do it properly, so that put that 3.5 hours in between.
And we had briefly talked about this, but that's interesting to me because I've, you know, in looking at previous driving under the influence cases, you know, blood alcohol level can actually increase the longer you get away from the event because your body starts absorbing it, so it can actually drive up these numbers. So that was interesting to me because she ended up with a 0.18, which is well over the legal limit. But I'm surprised that the defense didn't make a bigger issue of the fact that it was 3.5 hours after the fact.
One of the things that they did make an issue about, and I'm going to talk about the body-worn camera again, and I made a note, okay, question mark. because it says the defense referred back to the alphabet test, which you mentioned
Yes.
that they had conducted on her, and she had passed that. Schmidt, the detective, admitted his body-worn camera was muted at the time. The defense pointed out then that the only proof of her passing the test is his testimony. But that's been the case since the beginning of time. We haven't always had body-worn cameras. So to me, that's a loose argument there.
Yeah, and that's where there's no regulation for them about muting it. The video has to be going the whole time. It was the only thing.
And it was.
And it was. So that really wasn't anything that they could create an issue with.
One of the things that I think we were all shocked about was this video that came out of Marshella Chidester in her kitchen. So we want to show that to you and then discuss this as well. There's no sound on this. So Megan, tell us while we watch this what the prosecution is saying and why this is significant.
So these are starting around 9:30 a.m. You can see the adjusted time at the bottom. That was 10. This is around 2. It's her walking around her kitchen with sometimes what appear to be those small, almost single-serve bottles of wine. And then there's also a glass of wine that she comes back with it empty. And here she had just filled it up. And right there on the bottom, it says 14:32, so about 2:30. So that's about a half hour before the crash.
And what was found in her car?
They had found a small single-serve bottle of wine that had been empty in her center console. The defense tried to say she could have been recycling it, but it doesn't.
Did the
that didn't
defense
hold up.
say anything about this video?
They didn't really. They just kind of questioned about getting it during the search warrant where it happened, but there was no kind of issues
What a
that they
piece of
brought up with
evidence.
it.
Do we know why she had this camera in her kitchen?
That never came up. At the beginning, they had shown the footage from outside of her home, and they had mentioned, and there's one camera inside her home. And then this was brought up during the rebuttal case. So on the last day of the trial, they pulled this out.
Yeah, so obviously, when I look at this case from the outside, as somebody who's covered cases for many years now, I mean, the big thing still comes down to that blood alcohol test. If the defense could discredit it in some way, maybe they had a chance. But if they weren't able to, then she was really going to have tough sledding when it comes to this case. And I know the defense, they brought in like this expert from California who was criticizing the way they handled the blood. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I think we might even, do we have sound of that?
We do. And that's where the defense kind of went in, though, saying that when you looked at the results, there was ethanol found, but then there was also some other
Acetone.
There was acetone, isopropanol. The isopropanol was absolutely minimal, nothing at all. There was very trace amounts of this acetone, though, and that's where it became a question of how does that appear in someone's blood? And the defense says it was because of fermentation and the blood not being handled properly, whether it not being refrigerated, or that the preservative that's in these vials not being shaken fully so that the blood stays in good condition.
All right, let's hear from this prosecution expert.
So, in your training and experience, is there anything to suggest that this blood had suffered from the fermentation process?
No.
Is there anything in your training and experience to suggest that this blood was not properly preserved?
No.
Is there anything in your training and experience to suggest that this blood was not properly stored and transported before it arrived at the lab?
No.
Let's go right to the defense expert now.
I think that the result that is allegedly obtained as 0.18 of that blood level, that's truly accurate.
No, because there were several volatile organic compounds present in the sample.
And all of that combines to not giving you an honest and accurate sample.
It gives you a result that is not the same as it was when the blood was drawn.
So take us through what the defense was trying to say with their expert and the prosecution.
So the defense was saying that the blood was not handled properly starting from the time it was taken. There was 2 vials that are taken, and in the bottom of these vials is a preservative. And once the blood is put into those vials, you have to invert it enough times so that it's evenly distributed to keep the blood so that it doesn't have to be refrigerated, so that there's no clotting, so that there's no fermentation. And the defense says it's only inverted twice, that's not enough. And because there was this small amount of acetone found, they believe fermentation had occurred. The prosecution expert witness says if there had been fermentation, there would have been a lot of pressure in those tubes by the time I went to go test it. There would have been clotting. We would have seen these things, and acetone can naturally occur in blood. It can occur when people have diabetes. It can occur when people are on the keto diet, and it can also occur in people who binge drink. So they said it's not that acetone can't naturally occur, and it was also such a trace amount of acetone that they don't even actually have to report it at that level.
Were you surprised that the way that the defense chose to go about saying that there was some mistake here was with the blood, targeting the actual scientific evidence versus other things they could have gone with?
Yeah, I think it's really, when you're trying to do that kind of attack, I mean, you're attacking experts who deal with this all the time. And when you get a number of 0.18, that's not just a little over, the intoxicated level. I mean, that's about twice, that's more than twice as much. So, I mean, that doesn't, to me, that didn't make sense. What would have made more sense to me if she truly did have epilepsy or some kind of medical condition that could have explained why she quickly accelerated and apparently didn't let off the accelerator. That seemed like that would have been a good line of attack, but they never mentioned it.
Where's the doctor? Where is her doctor saying she had neuropathy, she had seizures, she came to me on this date, this is why she was on the medication, maybe she was hospitalized this date, these are the issues we've had over the years, this is the prescription she was on and how much. That is what he's talking about.
And I mean, the defense attorney, he would come and tell the different journalists who were there and say, I've subpoenaed her doctor, I've tried to get him, I've done a mail trace on him, he's not showing up.
And why is that? Because what do we know about the doctor?
He is facing about 35 counts in charges of his own. He is going through the legal system himself right now.
So even if he had shown up, I don't know they would have had a ton of credibility.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
Which goes back to the defense calling a witness that is potentially not credible. They're really not working with much here.
It just really seemed like they're kind of grasping at straws with what they were trying to do. I mean, this was such a high-profile case. In Monroe County, there was a lot of interest in this, and you kill 2 kids. So I think the defense attorney even said, look, she was convicted before this trial even happened because people hated her for killing these 2 kids. So when you think about it from a defense side, it was a really tough thing to try to do. But what do you make of that? I mean, him saying that she was convicted before we got here.
He said that, and I mean, it was a complete shift. We would kind of check in with him every day, and he thought things were going well. He's like, I can tell that the jury's thinking a lot about this. And then the second it came back guilty, he said, this was set against her from the beginning. We're going to appeal this. He even mentioned like she had the option to try and flee the country is something that he said at one point. But, I mean, it's hard to know what his strategy was when he presented something in opening and didn't follow through with it.
He did not.
I would have been really interested to see if he had done those things, how it would have turned out, bringing up her medical history and stuff.
What did you observe with the jury? Did they get emotional? Were they upset?
It was, the jury was very interested. You could tell a lot of them were taking notes the whole time. And there was a lot of back and forth between the different expert witnesses, and you could tell that they were thinking about it. They did get emotional. It was a lot of women in the jury. And, when the mom was testifying, that was obviously the most emotional testimony throughout the trial. Some of them, you could see wiping tears. And even just the demeanor, though, and the way that they interacted with the different attorneys, they seemed more open and welcome to the prosecution at the end of the day. The prosecution made one joke, they kind of all laughed. The defense tried hinting at jokes, and nothing from the jurors.
So when you think about a key piece of evidence that the jury might have focused on, because they only testified, or they only deliberated for about an hour and a half. I mean, was there one piece of evidence or testimony that really you think resonated with them?
That you thought, this is it, this is the smoking gun.
I think it has to be the video of her inside her house, because throughout the rest of the trial, there had been no timeline of what she had done throughout the day. We had only known that she for sure had one glass of wine at Verna's, but we didn't know what else could have happened. If one glass of wine, you wouldn't expect someone's blood alcohol content to be 0.18, unless maybe it was mishandled. But then to show her drinking starting at around 9:30 in the morning all the way through 2:30, I think kind of
Right.
what was going to happen.
I'm actually curious what the mood was in the courtroom when the jury comes back after an hour and a half. I mean, I've dealt with cases where juries will deliberate for 3-4 days. I mean, an hour and a half when you're talking about a case like this. I mean, what was the mood like?
Yeah, that insinuates that they went in, they took the roll. How does everybody feel? Okay, let's fill out the paperwork, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, I was surrounded by family. They were holding each other, you know, whispering to each other, kind of being like, okay, you got this, like, it's gonna be good. I was just a few feet away from the dad of the two kids, and I mean, he had a huge support system there. He was there every day of the trial. Different people were always with him. And I mean, they were holding on, and the second that first guilty was read, I mean, everyone around me broke out in tears.
I think it's a relief to know that this is all coming to an end, but in each of these trials, doesn't matter if it's a murder or any kind of, you know, where someone's being held responsible in a criminal trial, the family always says, you know, it doesn't bring our loved ones back, but it's good to know that someone is going to be punished for what they did. And the family didn't speak or anything after?
The dad actually did. He said that the first thing he was going to do was going to go to the gravesite of his two kids, tell them about what happened. You know, this didn't bring them back, but it's at least something.
Justice.
It's, you know, and I heard people around me saying she got what she deserved, you know, that this is at least just that little bit of something for what happened.
So now she's going to be testified, or she's going to be sentenced on May 15th.
Yes.
You know, she's 67 years old. What kind of sentence can we expect from these convictions?
I mean, she's facing 2 life sentences, 2 15-year sentences, and 5 5-year sentences. Wow. So the way that the defense put it is this is honestly a death sentence for her rather than these life sentences. Because at this point, no matter amount of time, she's going to be just getting older.
And what did you see from her when the jury came back and they said guilty?
There was really no reaction. I mean, she kind of just stood there and, you know, she put her head down a little bit, but I didn't see any crying or...
She had her cell phone and she was trying to get to her purse, and obviously there was some confusion on her part. She didn't know that, hey, it's time to put your hands in behind your back and get handcuffed and taken away. And she's been living, because she posted bond, she's been living outside of the jail.
So now this is from now until she is sentenced. This is her first time staying for a long time in jail.
And her husband, have we ever heard from him?
No,
Because it seems like she calls upon him a lot. Where's my husband? And you know, it seems that maybe is her comfort blanket. But what did we hear from him, or did he come every day?
He came every day, but he was outside of the courtroom because he was potentially going to testify. We were told it was about 50-50 every day on whether or not he was going to testify. In the end, he ended up not testifying. And I mean, he would have been someone too,
interesting,
who I
isn't
think,
it?
you know, could have talked about her medical history or even just humanized her a little more, which wasn't really done.
But then he would have had to face questions if he was home at the time that she was drinking that wine on that camera too, on cross-examination. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we didn't end up hearing anything from him. So I don't know what his thoughts are or anything.
Yeah, so obviously, from her perspective, I mean, she's going to be able to appeal this sentence, and I know her attorney had already talked about an appeal. So when you think about that, a lot of times when you're looking at appeals, it comes down to, well, the defense attorney didn't do this. They didn't call the husband. She should have testified. They should have brought in
the argument could be didn't provide an adequate defense.
Yeah, so, I mean, you were there. Is there something that you think they might be able to focus on for an appeal?
I mean, I honestly think not having an adequate defense. I mean, her attorney, he called 3 witnesses. and one of them had already been one of the prosecution witnesses. He was the one who talked about the EDR, which is like the black box of a car. It was the waitress who served her at Verna's, and then his expert witness. There really
And he didn't
wasn't,
cross-examine a lot of them too.
there
A lot
just
of the
really
prosecution
wasn't a
witnesses.
clear strategy or story he was trying to tell, where the prosecution, I mean, laid out, here's who you're going to hear from, this is the story we're going to tell, this is what we're going to prove to you. The defense sent out an opening, and then nothing really happened in his case in chief.
I was thinking, as Megan was saying this too, I mean, okay, say he can't get a hold of this doctor that allegedly treated her. Does he call in another expert who has not treated her in neuropathy or seizures? If that's truly the case, I would think if I were allowed, that's what I would do. Is there a reason that he can't do that?
Not that I can think of, but you would, if she truly did have epilepsy, she has medical records. So she would be able to produce her medical records and then call in some sort of doctor that could, say, look at these medical records.
See, I think
what
that's
does this
so
show you?
huge. I think the wine in the kitchen, obviously, because that's a visual and we can see. But if you're going to say the woman has epilepsy or neuropathy and has seizures, where are the documents?
Yeah, and I mean, she told one of the responding officers, it's in the body camera footage, the last seizure she had was in March. That's what she said. I mean, you would think that there would be some sort of medical record that they could produce to show this, and because this happened
And
late
medical
April.
records are electronic, right? So we don't need XYZ doctor to necessarily show up to get these documents.
Yeah, and the thing about having epilepsy, that raises a whole nother question. There is something in the state law, I'm not sure what Michigan's is, but if you have a seizure or if you have epilepsy, you can't drive. So I almost wonder if they would have brought up the fact that, well, yeah, I have epilepsy, would the prosecution then have pounced and said, well, under Michigan law, you shouldn't have even been in that car.
Because I think it's normally about 6 months without having some sort of episode or
Waiver.
issue. And I mean, if she's saying it's in March, again, we don't know when the last time she had one, if she has seizures. There, at one point, had been another mention of it being October that the last time she had one, but it never got clarified. And I mean, I think that would be another thing, thinking of, if she wasn't able to be, or wasn't supposed to be driving, then why was she?
And if I'm a member of a jury and, I'm being promised these things and then they don't ever talk about it and explain it, in my mind, I'm just going to be thinking, look, they're just grasping at straws here.
Yeah,
They
that's
know
a big
they've
problem.
got nothing.
You got to be real careful about what you say you're going to deliver, and then you don't deliver.
And I mean, the one thing they did have was that she was on a medication called gabapentin, which is prescribed a lot of times for seizures. And it is a depressant, so that mixed with alcohol could have even led to more feelings of intoxication.
And
at
did
the
that
time of
show up
driving.
in the blood, the gabapentin?
It did.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the sentencing is going to be May 15th, right? You're going to be there. Do you expect the family to talk at all at that point? Have the attorneys given any indication of that?
They haven't. I'm hoping the dad has been very talkative. I don't think many people have heard from the mom, though. But the dad has been very vocal and talked about what the experience has been like and what it was like for him those 4 days in court.
And there's a civil suit pending by the family and a couple of the other, there's other plaintiffs that have been since added. I assume people who were at the boat club that day may have been injured against Chidester, the tavern, and where she had that one glass of wine, and the Swan Boat Club. And that has to do with the way that the road goes around the tavern.
I believe that, and then also
club.
that there's no, like, those large, like, cement balls that are sometimes around different public areas, or there was nothing to stop a car, is really, I believe, what they want to see change there.
Do you have any final thoughts on this? I mean, you were there, and what?
I mean, it was a lot back and forth. I wish the defense had a stronger case. I think to, show a little bit more of her personality, to bring up those medical records, to keep hinting at it at the whole time. But at the end of the day, I think, like, I keep going back to that footage in the kitchen because it just stood out. It felt like a gotcha moment because
we
this whole
rarely see evidence like that. Yeah.
because I mean, of all places for her to have a camera and then to show it the whole day. But the prosecution said it wasn't supposed to be that gotcha moment. It was, you don't try a case like this and go back to tracking down every drink a person has, it goes down to that blood alcohol content. And I mean, they had multiple experts testify that everything seemed sound with it. It was tested correctly. They believe that is truly the correct number.
We have that sound right now. Let's take a quick listen to that.
I've done many, many drunk driving trials over the course of my career. I've never proven a single one of them by trying to track down every drink that the defendant had before they drove. I've always proved it with a blood result.
So that's what you were just talking about. Did he feel the need to defend showing that video for some reason? Was it controversial or?
I mean, I think there was the question of why didn't he show it during his case in chief and why did he bring it out in the rebuttal? But he said because he didn't feel the need to, or it wasn't supposed to be, you know, here's every drink she had, here's everything that happened. It was proving the intent and showing her blood alcohol content. That was his focus in the trial.
Well, Megan, we certainly appreciate it. You did an amazing job. Your perspective is wonderful to hear because we weren't in there. Most people can't go to these things. So all of the insight that you were able to provide was great. We appreciate it. And hopefully we can follow up after the sentencing and when we find out what happens with the civil trial. Thanks so much for joining us here for 11 Investigates Case Files. I'm Melissa Andrews along with Brian Duggar. We'll see you next time.